Great. So welcome to the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee of the 27th of January 2026. And it's the first Performance and Overview Scrutiny meeting of the year. So welcome everybody. It's great to see all of you as committee members online and in the chamber as well. We have one apology, I believe, from Councillor Crook.
Yes, Chair. Councillor John Crook, and he's substituted today by Councillor Sue McConnell.
So thank you, Councillor McConnell, for joining us. That's really helpful. And I should say that welcome to this being a special meeting. It's special in a sense. It wasn't in the annual agenda. We added this very particularly to cover some items that we've been very interested in the last couple of years. And they are very much focused on schools and pupils and learners within the county, as we'll come to. And so for that reason, we're not covering some of the normal items such as meeting minutes from the previous meeting and forward plan. And the reports are for information very much more than for any formal approval. So we'll move into, first of all, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor McConnell.
I think it's probably not prejudicial, but I should probably mention in connection with, I think it's the first substantive agenda item, that I sit on the exclusion panel of the school as a governor. That's
great. Actually, we could do with an exclusion panel sometimes for us as councillors. I think that would be, I don't mean in this meeting, but there are one or two I've seen.
Just be careful what you wish.
Yeah, indeed so. But thanks for mentioning that. So we'll move straight into onwards towards the school exclusions update. And if I may, before doing so, just a couple of things. Firstly, that we received the Eston report this week, was published this week. And it seemed to me very apropos as we were considering the reports that we are today on school exclusions and school health research, to recognise that we have a good report in front of us coming from the Eston work in considering Monmouthshire's education services and youth services. I think in the report there is much for us to be proud of in terms of the council and for our residents to be aware that this has happened. It's an important report and that it says a great deal that reassures us that the really important aspects of work to support our schools and our learners is taking place, and that's good to know. It's also good to see that there's clear evidence of improvement in important areas since the last inspection report. So I just wanted to make that point, as we don't have these reports very often, to recognise them when they do come forward, and to say well done to Will, Will McLean, who's not here today, he's in another meeting, but well done to Nikki, to Hannah, to Rachel, Morwenna, to Sharon, and the entire team who are involved in the day-to-day work, and also to Councillor Wright as the cabinet member. There is still much to do when we look at how we perform compared to others as a whole county in our outcomes for schools, but there's also a lot to celebrate. So I think it's only proportionate that we do so. If I could also say welcome very much to Hugo Hutchinson from Monmouth Comprehensive, and to Kelly Waith from Chepstow School, head teachers of both, and wonderful that you were able to take time out. It's really appreciated. We all know just how busy you are, and it's very, very helpful to hopefully ourselves as committee members, but more broadly the council, and indeed residents who may be watching now or at a later stage, to have the real life experience of dealing with the matters that we're going to be considering today. So thank you very much indeed for making time to join us today. Much appreciated. So we're going to move into the school exclusions update, where we're scrutinising the latest figures and the council's performance in relation to that. We have officers with us today as well. Could I ask you, Morwenna and Rachel and Emma, please just to introduce yourself as you speak and your title, that would be very helpful, just in case I mispronounce it. But you are the head of inclusion, vulnerable learners leads, and the healthy settings leads. But please introduce yourself when you speak. I'm going to pass over to you to introduce this report, and then we'll open to questions. Thank you.
Prynhawn everyone. My name is Morwenna Wagstaff. I'm the Head of Service for Inclusion within Monmouthshire County Council. Myself and Rachel and Emma and our two head teachers welcome the opportunity to update members and any residents on the use of exclusions in Monmouthshire schools during the last academic year of 24-25. As you can see from the report, the data shows an increase in the use of exclusions, both fixed term and permanent, across our schools, alongside the growing prevalence of behaviours of concern. We outlined in our report that the Welsh Government National Behaviour Summit in May 25 highlighted that national increase in the variety, range, magnitude and frequency of challenging or disruptive behaviours since the pandemic. Exclusion is something head teachers can and do use to ensure the safety of pupils and staff, and each exclusion, fixed term or permanent, represents a unique set of complex circumstances around an individual child or young person and their family. We're fortunate today that both Hugo and Kelly, two head teachers from two of our secondary schools, have been willing to join us and will be able to provide a school's perspective to any questions that members may have. As an inclusion service, we continue to work closely with our schools and across the range of professionals within the service and wider partners to better understand and recognise the behaviours of concern and distress that are presented in our schools, and to acknowledge that these can often reflect barriers to learning or additional learning needs. We have developed a clearer understanding or deeper understanding of additional learning needs and their potential association with social, emotional and mental health needs for many learners, which can place them at risk of exclusion. Consequently, exclusion data related to ALN may be influenced by this heightened awareness of the SEMH, social, emotional, mental health related issues. The report highlights that the use of fixed term exclusions continues to increase. For this academic year, or for the last academic year, school FTE fixed term exclusions were higher than in the previous 2 years, and there was an increased number of learners who received repeat exclusions. Nearly all exclusions were for 5 days or fewer, with an average length of 1.5 days. This year, alongside the numbers of permanent exclusion that were issued and upheld, we have reported the number of permanent exclusions that were issued but then rescinded. Typically, this is because a package of appropriate support around the individual pupil has been developed in partnership with parents, carers, the school and the local authority. During the academic year of 24-25, there were a reduction in the number of permanent exclusions issued, and all 23 issued were rescinded. Of 9 of these, they were in the primary phase and 14 in our secondary schools. This highlights the increase in behaviours of challenge and distress presented by our younger pupils. As an inclusion service, we continue to offer ongoing support and challenge and strong professional learning for school staff, which creates increased confidence and competence in meeting a wide range of pupil needs, including managing the needs of pupils presenting with behaviours of challenge or distress and associated exclusions. I'm now happy to open to any questions. I've got my colleagues, Rachel Roachrook, who is our Vulnerable Learner Lead with me, and Emma Taylor, Healthy Settings Lead, and also Hugo Hutchinson and Kelly Waith. You can't see them at the moment, but as you ask questions, they will, I think, become visible on the screen. Thank you.
And thank you, Morgan. That's very helpful indeed. Just as we're opening for questions, I don't know, Hugo and Kelly, you'll be coming to this with a very particular perspective of having to deal with fixed-term exclusions, having to be involved in reaching fixed-term exclusions, and sometimes some of the permanent exclusions. Was there anything you wanted to comment on before we open for questions, and then we'll pick up? Are you happy at this stage? We'll move into questions. Great, thank you. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to see who is first. It's Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, everyone, for the work that you do, and the staff in the schools and the heads that are there today. Thank you so much for under challenging circumstances sometimes. And thank you also for the reports. I think this is like perhaps best practice, because all the acronyms have been explained, and so thank you so much for that from us that are not experts, or people at home, residents at home that are reading these reports. Thank you. So I've got 3 questions. The first one, please, is that you can see on page 3, and you've Marina, you've mentioned it, that the incidences and the number of days have increased almost twofold over the last 4 years, or those last 3 periods of time. And the relationship between the numbers and the instances has increased. So wonder what the reason is you think that that is. So we've got 578, but 2,198 instances, 2,198 instances, and 3,500 days. So I wonder, first of all, what your feelings are about that, but also how does that relate to Wales, to the UK, and perhaps the world, perhaps possibly. You mentioned in the report that it's a similar, and you did just then, it's a similar increase everywhere, but I wonder on in which ballpark, and how many are repeat exclusions and what happens to them, please. That's number 1. Number 2 is around the table on page 3, table 2 on page 3. So there's an increase in incidents, but as you said, there's rescinded in 24, 25, 23 of them. So how are they rescinded, please? Could you explain that process and why, and what happens to those children in that instance, please? And then the third one is around something, the social emotional mental health learning, and applaud the great increased training and understanding, trauma informed and everything, and restorative support and the staff focused. I wonder, it's been mentioned in 6.6, the staff focused approach, but wonder whether there's any opportunity, and I think we'll see it in the next report, where it's been suggested that there might be more need, or might be an opportunity to help young people understand themselves and the massive transition they're going through, and how to soothe and cope, and really about resilience. So it's great that we've got all those teachers trained to spot the issues, but if we could have some proactive encouraging the young people to have those sessions, as is described in the feedback in the next report, actually, then prevent some of these children getting into that area, or down that road towards exclusion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bond, and that you're moving, I think, very helpfully into some of the prevention issues and some of the causes of it. But yeah, let's open that to, I don't know who wants to pick up the some of this is about understanding better the relationship between instances and days, but also the rescinding, before moving on to the social, emotional, mental health. Fantastic, yeah. And I'm very keen to also hear, Hugo and Callie's real life experience in this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond, for your questions, and I'll try and pick them off, but as really happy for the colleagues around the table to add to this. So in terms of the difference between the number and the instances of the fixed term exclusions, you are right that we have seen an increase in that. And I think, so the instances are each time a fixed term exclusion is issued. So that could be for, I think, a minimum of half a day, right up to a 15-day period. So what I also reported, and is in the report, is the average, the majority, I think 97%, are under 5 days, and the average exclusion is still for 1.5 days. So I think it depends on the kind of severity of the incident and the decision of the head teacher to at what length of time a fixed term exclusion is issued for. There has been an increase in that. I'm happy to hand over to a head teacher at this point, because they can obviously give a school's perspective, and then maybe we can bounce it back.
Shemai Powell, thank you, councillors. It's great to have an opportunity to talk about this. So, as I said, I'm Hugo Hutchison. I'm the head teacher of Monmouth Comprehensive School. And yeah, if I just can try and pick up, councillor, on that first question around the repeat exclusions, the length of exclusions. it's always a judgment for the head teacher in each individual circumstance as to the length of whether to exclude or not, and then the length of the exclusion. There is guidance from Welsh Government and others on how you should go about making that decision, but it's always in your judgment. And in every situation, you are dealing with a unique set of circumstances. There's no tariff, nor should there be, about, well, if it's item X, then you do 1 day, and if it's item Y, then it's 2 days, and if it's both of them together, it's 3. It is imperative that we take into account the individual circumstances of the situation, of the child, of the family, of the impact on the wider school community. All of these things go into a single decision that we have to make as a head teacher. So you will see variation, and I would caution against having a reaction that is simply, lower numbers is good and higher numbers is bad, because it is not, and I haven't heard that this afternoon, but I would caution against any thought of that, because any head teacher only excludes if they feel that there is no reasonable alternative to that happening. So you have seen increases in the number of exclusions, and I would say those are for valid reasons. Without making this as a speech, I'd say that there is a number of reasons, including post-pandemic, some fracturing of the relationship between that social contract between home and schools. Behaviour is more challenging in schools. It is more challenging in schools across the UK. And these are all factors that have led to those. I'll stop now, otherwise it'll become an assembly.
Hugo, it's really, really interesting. So please don't feel you should stop. We don't get many assemblies anyway here, so it's very, very informative. When head teachers reach the determination that there should be an exclusion, I think part of what lies behind this, and that colleagues have been interested in, is what happens when that pupil is, or when that learner is excluded. What work might be done, or what support might be put in place to ensure that when they return, it doesn't repeat itself, and is just to see if there's more that we can do, or what does happen, because if we have repeat exclusions, and we clearly do, looking at the numbers, and to what extent can we drill that down to begin with?
So I'll hand over to Kelly in a second. I'll just say from my own experience, for the vast majority of students in our school, they've never been excluded. And then for the majority of those who are excluded, actually, they don't go on to have repeat exclusions. So the process that is in place for them works. So that process includes that communication with home directly about exactly what's happened, that dialogue, having an established relationship with home so that they understand that this is your element of last recourse. And then a meeting before the student returns, post-exclusion meeting, to discuss the incident, to get the student to own their behaviour through dialogue, through a restorative discussion, to make apologies where required, and anything else that's necessary. And it will vary a little bit between schools, but essentially that's what you're trying to do, is saying at this time you cannot be at school, but we want to welcome you back. And that process of ensuring a student can come back positively and step back into school is a really important one to try and avoid repeats.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch back on what Hugo said on the first point, actually. We do, as head teachers, try where best possible to avoid exclusion. So we look at what other reasonable adjustments can be made before issuing a fixed term or a permanent exclusion, whether that will be consultation with the local authority, with the family, with other head teachers, and exploring other opportunities. But also we've also developed practice around where we internally exclude children within our schools to avoid fixed term or permanent exclusions. But as Hugo said, some of the behaviours that are being displayed in schools are such high tariff that it does warrant a fixed term exclusion. It's really important, as Hugo said, the communication, developing the relationships, and clear boundaries with parents and the children, and having those post meetings are so important. We call them a restorative meeting, return to school meeting, where the parent and the child attends. but it might be that there's a variety of different agencies attending that meeting, depending what comes out in the initial conversation with the parent. So we might have a multi-agency approach. We might have officers from the local authority attending. We might develop a plan then called a PSP with that child, and have really clear timelines of what support could be put in place and look at the impact of that support after a period of time. So there are lots of measures that we put in after an exclusion to ensure that that behaviour doesn't repeat itself as well. And I would agree with Hugo, for the majority of the children, they don't repeat those behaviours. Children often don't like being internally excluded. They don't like being internally excluded from their peers as well. So that often is a very strong preventative measure.
It's fascinating to get that perspective, and I think it's worth making sure that we do set the correct perspective. And Hugo, you're pointing towards this about it's only the minority of pupils who are excluded. If I've got the numbers right, there are 39 schools, and I think we've got approximately 12,000 pupils in the county. And the reports 5.3 showing 578 learners were excluded during the last academic year. So that amounts to about 5% of the population of schools being excluded. That might surprise people that it's as high as that, because whilst it is clearly a small minority, it's not a negligible minority, 5%. And if they are, as 578 learners responsible for 2,198 instances, the average repeat looks like it's about four times. So this isn't, our job here is absolutely not to try and criticize what we're doing, because why should we? What we're interested in is what's happening and whether there's something different or more that we could do, either as a council or socially, whatever it might be, to turn this the other way. Because right now the trajectory, certainly on FTEs, looks extremely worrying. What would next year look like and the year after if it's moving at speed to the numbers that we've got right now? So I just don't know if you've got any thoughts on those points.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up, because I think so in terms of what else can be done, I think there is an element to which everyone will have their own opinion about whether exclusion is a valid sanction to use, because you'll have some elements of the education sector that are anti-exclusion, I would say, as a matter of principle. And maybe 10 years ago, you'd have had a number of schools who were aiming to be zero exclusions. That's faded away a bit, because what used to happen was you'd have kind of hidden exclusions or illegal, frankly, exclusions, or you would have unsafe schools. And you would have this thing that we refer to as passive exclusion, which is students not wanting to go to school and access their education because they are scared of being hurt or being intimidated or being exposed to behaviours by students who have no consequences. So it's a really complex set of situations. I think it's shared by all the heads, that exclusion is a valid sanction. It's a one of last recourse, but it's a valid sanction. But you're also right, Councillor, that it's got to be in line with other approaches. It's not simply, we'll put you out of school for a day and then hopefully you'll magically come back and then everything will be fine and wonderful, because that just isn't the case. That's why, as Kelly's saying, this multidisciplinary approach, multi-agency approach, relational approach, as in building up that relationship between home and school, is absolutely vital. Otherwise it won't work as a tool. We do get cases, though, where there are repeat exclusions and a high number. And I can tell you that we had a permanent exclusion where the student had tens of exclusions. Now, you look at those numbers raw and just say, well, it's not working. But we also have a duty to avoid, and I know we're not on permanent exclusions yet, but we've got a duty to avoid permanent exclusions too. So I would rather use a fixed term exclusion a number of times and try and keep some kind of hold on that student, rather than just, give up really and at an early stage have to issue a permanent one. So it is really, really complex. The situation in schools is different to how it was 5 to 10 years ago. I am really not surprised that you're seeing the numbers rise. However, I can tell you from from my school, and I think it's probably replicated across, that there is a levelling off and a dropping off of numbers. And so there is no exponential rise. So if you look at the data next year, I would imagine that it'll look different in terms of where those charts are looking.
Yeah, and sorry, Hugo, to interrupt. I would agree with that, this report is the academic year 24-25, but the data for the autumn term of 25-26, this academic year, does suggest already that there is a decrease in the use of fixed term exclusions across our schools. I think it came out when we brought the exclusion report to Scrutiny last year. Sometimes there's a change going on in a school or a situation in a school that has led to a kind of an increase around the use of fixed term exclusions while, situations settle, or we had a number of quite serious events in school that would require that level of exclusion to maintain the safety. I think it's hugely valuable having Hugo and Kelly here to offer their kind of perspective, and I think we'll come to talk about the permanent exclusions in a moment, but I just wondered whether it would also be helpful to hear from Rachel Roach-Rook, our vulnerable learner lead. She's been in post since the end of the summer, to kind of answer the same question, but with a primary focus. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, it would be incredibly helpful. And Rich, please, if you could just bear with me for 1 second.
Oh, sorry.
Whilst we've got the opportunity to inquisition the heads, I don't want to miss that opportunity. But I just want to keep on this particular issue for a second before we lose the thread of it. And Kelly, just wonder, your experience in this. You mentioned the importance of the work that is done to support that learner when they are excluded for a fixed period, to try and minimise the potential for them to exclude again. The information that we've got in the report, it's great and very encouraging to hear that. I don't want to use the word anecdotally to suggest that this is not yet been borne out by reality, but it suggests that things are levelling off, which is very encouraging. So let's see where we get to. I'm just conscious of, I think that's what we heard a year ago, that things were levelling off because a year ago we'd seen very, very high rises. And what we've seen in the last year is that trajectory continuing. So the raw data is telling us that the secondary, to focus on secondary, instances has risen from 930 2 years ago to nearly 2,000 today. So it's not sort of going back a decade or 5 years. It's like the last 1-2 years. And the instances translate into the number of days to the tune of just over 1,000 days to nearly 3,000 days lost. The rise in the number of days is even faster than the rise in the number of instances. So I just wonder, do you have any particular support to try and make sure that young person is able to come back with a different approach? Or is there more that could be done to support the school in trying to ensure that? Is there a package? Is there something we could do to assist in that? Because right now, the numbers aren't going anything like in the direction of travel that we all want.
I think it very much depends on the circumstance and the individual child in terms of the package. I'll give you some example from the year 7 from last year. We accumulated 80 days lost, but there were some real complex needs with the children that were unidentified. Now, working with the local authority, and I sit on the contingency panel in terms of funding, we were able to access additional funding for some of these children and put that into a package in terms of what could that support look like. And in terms of this year, of that levelling out, that year 8 group has only issued 10 days. If I use a child in particular without naming anybody, they accrued 16 different instances last year of about 33 days. This year they've had 2 exclusions of 2 days. So that package is actually having an impact on those children. And I think it's very much working in collaboration with the local authority to look at the individual child and what support is available. It is difficult because in terms of health, waiting lists are very, very long. So when Moena's mentioned in the report around professional learning for Staff, that's really important, and we've had trauma-informed practice, and the local authority officers have come into the school to support staff with the needs of the children. But I think, you can't have you do have to have bespoke intervention for each and every child. And I hope that's answered your question, Alistair.
Yeah, it's really helpful, and the complexity comes through very strongly from
Very
what
complex,
you and Hugo are both saying. Everyone is different. Hugo, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to what Kelly's already said. So I'd like to mention, by the way, that I am the longest serving secondary head teacher in the county. I've got to get that into every meeting. But as the longest serving, I can say that the collaboration and genuine collaboration between the local authority and schools is the strongest that it's been. So, for example, the Inclusion Network, which is led by Morwenna, and in which all schools are participating at a number of levels, is an opportunity for that multi-agency discussion, for that ability to be able to direct resource and expertise into the right place, and to make sure that we're able to collaborate between professionals. And it allows us to be able to respond to that thing that you've been obviously highlighting, which is that increase. So that's an example of having a structural approach to the collaboration rather than relying on individual relationships, so that we as head teachers can call on the expertise of others to be able to get the right support in place for students. I know that we'll be talking about rescission as well at one point, and I think that's a really important point to be talking about, which is a good example, a really good example of supporting students and fulfilling our obligations to avoid permanent exclusions where possible. And that only comes about because of the collaboration and the structural approach of the Inclusion Network and our ability to have those informed discussions with officers about those individual students and with the families as well. So those kind of approaches that are now becoming well established, that weren't even in existence a few years ago, are really important into the questions that you're asking.
It's really, really helpful perspective, because, you know, what we're, I think, seeing, and Rachel, come to you in a second to add your perspective on this, and thanks for being patient on this. What we're seeing is a report that's saying we've got trajectories which are really very, very concerning. But we're hearing very clear evidence that actually the system is working, and that it works well as the word system's a horrible word for these things, but people working together in collaboration from within the council to the schools is working well. The Inclusion Network is working well. The approach that's being taken by the schools is working because we're seeing a tailing off of it. So it's just drawing out that the report points one direction, and what we're hearing is very helpful, but it really suggests a different picture just now, which is something we'll see, you know, as we go through the year ahead as well. But Rachel, you thank you for bearing with us. I hope you don't mind. I just wanted to make sure we were fully hearing from Hugo and from Kelly on these things.
Just to provide you with a context from the primary school kind of context, if that makes sense. So we've put a lot of preventative kind of strategies in place to work with our schools on reducing exclusions. So our ability to kind of monitor the exclusions and link in with schools where we can see patterns emerging, and then to provide that support package around schools as well to prevent exclusions from escalating to the point of permanent exclusions. That's a real strength, and we've made huge improvements, haven't we? So in terms of when exclusions happen for primary age pupils, we have a clear process and system in place where we hold reintegration meetings, as Kelly and Hugo said, very much a multi-agency approach as well, and everyone working together for the best interest of those pupils and for their families as well, to try and get the best outcome for them. And, you know, there's been a huge amount of work across all of our inclusion team in terms of the professional learning that we provide our schools, our teams within our schools as well, working on building capacity within our primary schools, upskilling the school staff as well to be able to deal with behaviours that challenge. So there's been a huge emphasis in that. And at the moment, it's embedding, and we are seeing some positive impact going forward.
Again, that's really encouraging to hear. The report is telling us a different picture. The report, so I hate to come back to the report because I'm very, very encouraged, and I'm sure colleagues will be very encouraged if things are improving. What this is telling us is that in primary, the number of days lost through fixed terms exclusions has actually increased by substantially more in the last 2 years than in secondary. So it's increased by about 3.5 times, from 163 days to 550 days. And I just wonder if you can help us to understand. It's great that it's we're getting on top of it. What's driving it?
What we're seeing alongside that is an increase in behaviours of concern and physical distress from some of the pupils, which are kind of hitting the health and safety thresholds within the schools as well. So it's being mindful of the challenge and complexity of the behaviours that our schools are dealing with also.
When you say physical distress, that's the distress of the child.
So how they're showing their distress in
Right.
terms of their presentation. Yes, yeah. Within a primary kind of setting.
Yeah, Hugo. Sorry, I know Hugo was trying to come in and Morwenna.
Well, I think both Kelly and I are kind of thinking the same things of this. We've touched on this before. There has been a change in the last few years, post-pandemic, but also over the last 10 years more widely, in behaviours that we're seeing, and the significance of those behaviours, and then the impact both on individuals and on the wider community. It is directly linked to societal change like social media, the prevalence of mobile phones. One in, as people heard this, 1 in 4 5 to 7-year-olds has got their own smartphone. I don't know whether councillors were aware of this. But you have children in primary school who are on social media for hours and hours a day. Other risk-taking behaviours, I would say, especially in the last 5 years, actually risk-taking behaviours have significantly increased in secondary school, and I'm sure in primary as well. Allied to that, we have plenty of parents and families who are really engaged, but there is a significant and increased proportion, all schools are finding this, of parental disengagement, or an idea that it's schools' responsibility in isolation to solve these things. And we work really hard to build those relationships with families, but when families are disengaged, it is incredibly difficult to be able to get them to be engaged. And it is very hard to have any idea of a child who's coming to you for a small proportion of their actual time, of you being able to turn that around. Because a child, even if they've got 100% attendance, is at school over the entire time they have in a calendar year for about 11% of their time in a whole calendar year. 11%. The rest of the time they are not at school. So we have that proportion of time to be able to make that effect. So there are wider societal issues why we're getting these more challenging behaviours. And it is not to do with the individual county, it's not to do with the individual numbers, it's to do with a wider scope of issues that we're having.
Yeah, and you'll be able to point us in the right direction for this. So the numbers, the increase that we've seen in primary and secondary, is that consistent with the national increases? Because that's a picture we don't see in the report.
So the challenge there, and actually I checked this earlier, is we don't have whole Wales data for this period of time. There's a lag, quite a long lag. So we don't have the data to compare this. I think the previous year, Monmouthshire is above the national average. So that would be 22, 23, but we don't have the data around this year. I think across, though, the direction is similar in that there's been an increase across. I think that would be really useful, and actually we were talking about it earlier about actually having that data from Welsh Government quite quickly would be helpful for us to be able to provide those kind of comparisons. But I think the other bit, I just wanted to pick up on the primary bit, which sort of is linked, but I think what's important to note is, although we have a higher level of fixed term exclusions in our primary schools, when we break that down to kind of individual pupil level and individual school level, it's actually quite a small group of children having repeat exclusions. And again, coming back to kind of Hugo's point earlier, which is we're trying to do all that we can to prevent these children from being permanently excluded. And sometimes that means we're trying to get the support right around the individual needs, and recognising that for some children, they are having that, displaying those behaviours of challenge and concern that, are represented physically, so that, staff, other children are being hurt at times. And then that requires, that really clear risk assessment around those behaviours and how we can then manage them back in. And I think that's kind of, moves into that permanent exclusion piece that we can see there, that, last year there were 9 permanent exclusions issued for our primary learners, which is a huge increase, but it kind of reflects back that level of behaviours that we're being presented with in the primary school. And, to be blunt, levels of concern and distress that children are experiencing, but, as well. So I think it is a really difficult position. And I think that national data would be really helpful. But, and I've cited it in the report, mentioned it earlier, that the National Behaviour Summit that happened in May this year, that is the kind of information that we're getting out, albeit we don't have the data that kind of reflects that for the same period of comparison. Does that help?
Yeah, it is helpful, and obviously when we get it, it will be really good to be able to look at it. I'd like to take us back to Councillor Bond. You opened up a big conversation with the opening gambits, and it's inevitable that it would be that way. I hope you forgive me for wanting to make sure that Hugo and Kelly had the fullest opportunity just to talk to us about their experience in that particular those particular aspects. You raised the question about rescinded points, so we're coming to that now. I think, Morwenna, you were just saying, when we get there, could you explain what I think Hugo's already touched on it, but what's happening there in terms of the rescinded numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something new that we reported on this year, which we didn't previously report on last year. But we felt that for us to kind of reflect the true picture of what's being presented in our schools, we needed to also present those numbers of children who've hit that, Welsh Government threshold for permanent exclusion. But actually what we managed to do in its entirety last year was rescind them. And that's a change in approach from the local authority, and comes, as Hugo and Kelly have already alluded to, with a kind of a collaboration and a sense of trust between local authority and schools. Ultimately, in all of these decisions, particularly when the local authority gets involved at that kind of permanent exclusion level, it's the best interest of the learners that we hold central to that. And often there is a situation that we're faced with where school has got to kind of, their threshold for being able to manage that behaviour. Sometimes it can be, there's been criminality, it can be at a level of kind of criminal behaviour that actually is in that realm, but sometimes it can be about, really fractured relationships. But that point of permanent exclusion is never easy for a head teacher. And I think what we recognise as a local authority is, where possible and where appropriate, we can step in and offer support, which comes in lots of different shapes and sizes, depending on the individual needs of the children involved. And it's about us building a package that can meet those children's needs. So sometimes that package would be looking at a managed move to an alternative school so that they could have a fresh start somewhere else. And usually that would be supported by the local authority. It could be that they get to utilise the support from our pupil referral service and have a period of intervention with our pupil referral service, who would focus on the particular elements that have led to the permanent exclusion. In other cases, we've had rescissions of permanent exclusions and the child remains in the school from which they were to be permanently excluded, but there's a package of support that goes around them to allow that to be a successful reintegration back into school. So we made the decision to kind of report on those, because I think it's really important that those kind of, we could say we didn't have any permanent exclusions last year, but actually that doesn't provide us with the fair view of actually what we're facing both in our schools and challenges that staff and head teachers are facing, but also as a local authority, the ability to respond to a range of quite complex needs quite quickly in some instances, and to put a package of support around a child and their family, with the hope, obviously, that we can get them to reintegrate with education, hopefully for many of them reintegration back into a mainstream school, perhaps with support, perhaps not. In a few instances, those children have gone on and we found alternative specialist provision in line with their additional learning needs. So that it sort of reflects a change of approach as much as a kind of a wanting to be transparent really about how we manage exclusion. It's not something we shy away from, because it is a tool, and as Kelly and Hugo have said, it is permanent exclusion in particular is the last resort, and we recognise the impact it can have on a child and a family. So where it is appropriate and where it is possible, we would always try to respond to put an appropriate package that is agreed by the pupil, the family and the school and the local authority in place to allow a rescission of that PECS to happen. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, it certainly goes a long way. Just to get some clarity around a couple of the points there. So a managed move to another school would be considered a rescission of the permanent exclusion. That would be one category. Well, it might be appropriate for some pupils.
So
it wouldn't be about them being... the managed move would actually be something that would remove the permanent exclusion.
The permanent exclusion could only be rescinded in agreement with the head teacher and the family. And at that point, it's usually on the basis that a package has been agreed, which could be a managed move. In some cases, it's a managed move. In some cases, it's that we recognise that actually a place in the pupil referral service would be appropriate. But it would only... I believe it's only the head teacher who can rescind a PECS in the same way that it's only a head teacher who can issue a PECS. So it's about us, and that's where that kind of collaborative trust in relationship between local authority, school and family comes in to recognise that, the threshold for permanent exclusion has been met, and, there is an alternative which sometimes is in the best interest of that child to try and put a package together around them and rescind the PECS. I don't know from a school point of view whether you want to add anything there.
Yeah, in terms of the managed move process, this has worked quite successfully because of trusting relationships. Hugo and I, even though from north and south of the county, we understood the context of the reason for a managed move and ensured that child and the transition to another school was as seamless as possible. The child had actually made a mistake, which actually did warrant a permanent exclusion, but in dialogue with Hugo and I, and working with the local authority, that child now is thriving in another placement and being really successful. So the starting point is probably, if we're looking at a rescission and a managed move, is having the dialogue between the head teachers and the local authority to look at what are the best options for this child, whether it is PRS, whether it is a new school setting. But there also needs to be a period of time to put that support in place and then measure the support. So when a child transitions to another school, having a period of time to look at, right, are they settled? Do they need further support, intervention or resource? Or has this been successful? If it hasn't been successful, there is the opportunity to go back to the sending school. But at this point, we have done a couple of managed moves now, which have been successful for the children. So there is another opportunity that we are looking at.
And I'm sure we'd all agree that every individual success story is a success story worth achieving. So that's good to hear where it works. That must be very rewarding to see that does work. Hugo, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things. Firstly, with the rescission, sometimes the managed move can be directly between two schools, but as Kelly just alluded to, sometimes the package is firstly to the PRS, then after a period of time, the student then comes to another school. I can think of one, I was talking to the student this morning actually, who's come to us from the PRS really, really successfully. But the tariff, the incident that happened in their previous school definitely was worthy of a permanent exclusion. But then you've got a student who is on these numbers and in these numbers, but is a success story because of what's happened since. The other bit, I don't know whether it's kind of forbidden to talk about other local authorities, and I won't name it.
It's not forbidden.
I won't name it, but clearly I'm close to the border with other local authorities in my school in Monmouth, and unfortunately, when the child is living in another county, we don't have that same working relationship with the local authority, and they won't engage in any dialogue about what we're talking about, rescission, before a permanent exclusion is issued. So I'm in a position where I have to permanently exclude in order for any support to be gathered for that child. And I offer that not for local authority bashing, that's for you. But I just in terms of the power of the collaboration shouldn't be underestimated by counsellors.
That's really surprising and disappointing that just gets in the way of, because we, like most like most counties, we're surrounded by other counties that we would always looking to collaborate in different ways. We'll maybe take that away and have a look at that, Marina. I'm not sure to what extent that is a bigger problem, but conscious too of other members with their hands up. And I know, Councillor Bond, you asked about social, emotional, mental health, but I do want, we will come to that. I do want to give other members the chance to raise their questions too. So I'm going to make sure that we go around, and if anything is missed out, I'm sure you'll raise it as we get through the meeting. So I'm going to ask. Sorry, Councillor Bond. I'm going to move on to. Councillor Bond. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on, if I may, to Councillor Buckler. And we have other councillors who want to ask the questions. I don't want to just get trapped in cover all questions. Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. And it is, as you say, completely invaluable that Mr. Hutchinson and Ms. Waite are here. So I thank you very much. I will now move on to calling you Hugo and Kelly, if I may. But I just want to say how very much we appreciate it. I think it's very interesting, Hugo, that you say that there is an increase in parents thinking it's not their responsibility. And it's a very, very pertinent point. And how do we tackle this? Because it is obviously having a great effect and an ever increasing effect. And you're talking about smartphones and the prevalence of very young children having smartphones, which does seem, I know it's topical, but it does seem terribly damaging to young brains when they should be exploring the outside world, not the internal. So I think those were really important points you make, and they should inform how we as a council tackle this. And I'd be very interested to hear yours and Kelly's thoughts on that. My questions are really, what specific interventions do you think work, better than others? The pupil referral unit, early intervention, for instance, or managed moves, trauma-informed training, which I know a lot of us are very interested in, and the inclusion network support. What do you think is going to produce reduced repeat in exclusions and days lost? I'd also be interested, because obviously you and Kelly, I can sort of gather from your responses that you do talk quite a lot. So what formal escalation is triggered when exclusion practices are different in each school, and it seems that a small number of our schools account for a disproportionate share of exclusions. So how do we marry this up, and what are the the flag ups? So I'd be interested to know how we're going to tackle that. Rachel, you mentioned the fact that you are very much putting a place in prevention in primary schools rather than crisis response. But actually, how early are your preventions kicking in? How do you identify these problems that inevitably escalate as our children get older? It obviously has a great effect on things becoming worse. So yes, if you could come back to me on those, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Some important areas to move into. So really just some thoughts around the use of smartphones and parental responsibilities to begin with. Did you want to pick that up at all, Hugo, Kelly?
We're happy to talk. So starting with the parental disengagement, just to be clear, it's a section of parents in a section of the community, but it is something being felt across Wales. we do a lot in terms of trying to build those relationships on an ongoing basis. So heads of year, form tutors will contact home, pick up the phone rather than email is often a thing because a voice is easier to connect with rather than an email, inviting parents in as much as possible. There's been lots of talk over the last couple of years. I was at the National Behaviour Summit. It was raised there as well. The idea of having a agreement between home and school that's common between all schools, that sets out expectations of the school, expectations of the student, and crucially, I think, expectations of the parent or carer at home. What are their responsibilities in ensuring that that student is well supported? And that triangulated approach with everyone having shared responsibilities. It'd be great if it was all Wales, but possibly an all Monmouthshire approach could be a really, really powerful way of that happening. I think that'd be great. And then also, whilst we're not the solution for all of society's ills, we work hard as community schools to be a gateway to further help. So when we're talking about and inviting in citizens' advice, when we are able to provide access or signposting to mental health support, financial support, food banks, all of these type of things that enables us to be seen as the ones who can provide the signposting for support, and also builds that relationship between us and hard to reach families. All of our anti-poverty work that we do in terms of supporting disadvantaged families is really beneficial for that as well. You talked about smartphones. We have got, and it's in the first year, a Monmouthshire-wide approach, which is advising very strongly to all parents to not give their child a smartphone until year 10. And we've been, in the first year of that, going out and saying that rather than being, as we have been in the past, a bit timid about stepping on what are essentially parental decisions. But actually the feedback from parents has been really positive. Thank you, because it makes me feel, they tell us, thank you, because it makes us feel like we're not alone. When we're saying to our 10-year-old, no, you can't have unlimited access to the whole of the internet. So I won't perseverate on that for too long, but there's a position that all Monmouthshire schools have, and we've got a paper that we'd be very happy to share with councillors, I'm sure. And then just briefly, you asked about the differences between schools. I'll just say really clearly, and neither of us are here to talk about individual schools, and I'm sure you're not actually asking us to do that. We're responsible to our governing bodies for the exclusion rates, and also individual ones when you come to disciplinary hearings as well for students. And you will get variation between schools, partly because there isn't a tariff and because you have different individuals in those schools. And as I said before, the numbers might go up, the numbers might go down, but don't be pulled into the trap of thinking that low numbers is always good and high numbers is bad, because sometimes an individual school is dealing with a significant situation that might make the numbers spike. And the last thing you want is a head teacher not able to make the right decisions for their school community, not able to make their school and their students feel safe because they're worried about the numbers.
Yes, thank you for that. And Morena, yes.
I think your question, Councillor Buckley, that Hugo's just responded to was around this sort of formal escalation. So within the local authority, obviously we have sight of all of that data across our schools, and Rachel in particular looks through that, and we bring it and we report to that on a half-termly basis to Will McLean, who's the strategic director. But I think in terms of a challenge, when we do recognise that a school is using a high level of exclusion or a higher level and it's on the increase, or we have concerns that there might be some trends or patterns around a year group or a type of behaviour, I think we do challenge. And I was just looking in the report, I think I did outline it in the report. Where was it? I just had it. I think it's, I've just lost it now. 6. And it's just that element of, I'm just sorry, baffling over my own report, but we would ordinarily, here we go, 8.2. So we would meet with head teacher, senior leaders, pastoral leads. In the first instance, we have really good connections, as we've already talked about, that the 4 secondary schools and the local authority come together regularly in our inclusion network. So some of those issues would be raised in a kind of transparent, collective manner. But if we have a particular concern around a school, we would initially raise it with the head teacher, perhaps then with the chair of governors as well. And if, we would also explore other practices around sort of the use of professional learning, the use of internal sanctions and exclusion, reduced timetables, pastoral support plans, all of those things. And if those concerns continue, we have a team around the school approach that would be utilised, and in some cases has been utilised. due to concerns around levels of exclusion, and that gives us an opportunity then to kind of explore that in a bit more detail, to understand those stories behind those exclusions, because I think, you might have one child presenting with a very high level of need that's bringing your exclusion levels right up. You could have a change in a challenging there's lots of different reasons for it. So I think we know our schools fairly well, and Rachel's role in particular is about going in and supporting and challenging around those exclusions, sort of in quite a dynamic a manner. Is that fair enough? Have you got anything to add there, Rach?
Yeah, and just to add to that, you asked about preventative work with our primary phase. So we do a lot of professional learning to upskill the staff within our schools, but also we do have a team called the Education Support Team. And that team's purpose is, a focus is to reduce the amount of exclusions, and also to support our schools with promoting inclusive practices. So in that case, we work very closely in terms of early identification, and we have systems and processes in place where we work with our schools to ensure that the school receive input to assist them with any difficulties they're having with supporting children who are displaying behaviours of concern. So we have that preventative kind of arm as well within our schools supporting. That's been quite successful, Moana, hasn't it?
Yeah, the numbers of children being supported by the education support team are circa 70 plus sort of annually, and of those, the vast majority, other than a handful, remain in their mainstream placements. And they were children who are potentially at risk of exclusion due to the behaviours that they're presenting. So, I think you asked Councillor Buckley how early, sadly, we're seeing these behaviours being presented in early stages of primary phase. And we're having to kind of adapt and respond to that. And the education support team was established, I think, in 2023 as a response to that by the local authority, recognising that there was an increasing demand in that area, and that team's specific role is around supporting primary learners to maintain, their placements and sort of manage the behaviours of sort of distress and concern that are being experienced.
Yeah, thank you. That's very informative as well. It's such a challenging area, the whole area of prevention that you've touched on there. I know also that Councillor Buckley, you were asking about trauma-informed training, but I also know Councillor McConnell, you were asking about the same area, I think, when we were meeting a little earlier. Did you want to add to that particular question before we put it to our colleagues here?
Yes, if I can just add my question in, because I think this is all pertinent. First of all, thank you to our schools and our staff for the fantastic job you do. We're concentrating now on what is probably some of the more gnarly and difficult aspects of that, but just need to acknowledge the fabulous work that our schools do. So this is about processes, particularly around exclusion. At the point at which you're moving towards a number of fixed-term exclusions or permanent exclusions, the process in many ways becomes quite formal, and rightly so, because it's a very serious, it can culminate in a decision which will make have a massive impact on the young person or child in question. The thing that strikes me about that process is, one of the things that strikes me, this is quite granular, but the correspondence, the formal correspondence that goes on between the school and the parents is very legalistic and quite a stodgy, difficult, long-winded read. And I think that is very difficult. One of the things that long-winded legalistic letter will say is that if you don't agree with the length of the exclusion, you can try and persuade the head teacher, and there's a method of appeal, except it doesn't say it that quickly and not in a way which is easily understood or empowering of the person who receives it, and trauma-informed practice would say that person, and the young person should be encouraged to participate on an equal footing in those processes. I'm a school governor, I've had some really useful conversations with the head teacher at the school of which I'm a governor, but I'd be really interested in pick-up of that, because it's something which is often missing. It's not peculiar to education settings either, but that people, sometimes at their most vulnerable, get what appear to be the most aggressive forms of, or difficult to understand correspondence. Thank you.
Yes, I did want to link this with trauma-informed training. The question from Councillor Buckler, yes.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question, Councillor McConnell. And yeah, absolutely. I think I understand, and I will pass over to the schools in a minute. Those letters are actually templates from Welsh Government, which is tricky. But what we're looking at as an inclusion service and in partnership with the schools is trying to think about exclusion in a trauma-informed way, think about how that's understood, because we recognise that for some of our young people, the experience of an exclusion is traumatic, can be trauma-inducing, and actually can add to their bag of, difficulties that they're carrying around. So it is something that, in particular, with the younger learners, we're focusing on with the EST team, so the education support team, who work in a very trauma-informed way and are trauma-informed practitioners, as are many of our staff now in our schools. It's about making that experience as beneficial, for want of a better word, as possible. And, my experience would be that when any crisis happens, if it's the first time it's happened, you have to just respond to the crisis and put the respond appropriately to the kind of but after that, we would expect that there should be a plan, and there should be a plan that's kind of agreed with the child, the parents, and that might very much just be at school level, particularly at a secondary school. But in our primary phase, we would expect the local authority to be involved in that, to ensure that those kind of trauma-informed principles about developing positive relationships and enabling families, to hear the voice of the child and the parents, the carers, to make sure that provision that is then put, that support that's put around the child, has its best chance of success. And it is something that we, Rachel has come into the vulnerable learner lead role, but she was the lead teacher in the education support team prior to that, so has that direct experience of working with our schools. And that's something we're really interested in doing at a local level, because those templates are Welsh Government level, so we kind of are a little bit tied by what we can do with those templates that go out to parents. But I think what we're looking at is whether there's another layer of support and understanding that can go, because it's hugely daunting. I'm a parent of 3 children. It must just be the most terrifying and daunting experience to be called into one of those meetings to discuss something your child has done. So we are trying to recognise that. I don't know. I hope that answers those questions. But if anybody wants to add.
I'm happy to come in and add something further. I think transparency is really important in terms of the process. I completely understand what you're saying about the letter, but I think the education piece with parents and children around clear expectations, around consequences, and what particular behaviours might warrant or escalate to a certain consequence is really important. And we revisit this in our schools regularly through assemblies and through our parental meetings, etc. I think when we're at that process of escalation, having those real skilled staff to manage the children, manage their voice. We start with the child's voice around the situation, what's happened, can you tell us in your own words? And then we look at investigating what's happened, and then bringing the parents in so that they know we've listened to the child and we know that there's going to be support around the child. But unfortunately, the behaviour has warranted an exclusion. But in the meantime, even if it's a day, the child will still be provided work. If it's a longer period of time, we can put in wellbeing check-ins so that they have that real designated member of staff that they can check in, so that the process isn't as daunting that as anticipated. So I think that's really important as well.
It's a perspective that I think many people would not have thought of, that the entire process itself and the moments around it could be very daunting and traumatic for the young person who you actually want to get back into the school with the right approach that would remove the prospect of a repeat. So it brings about a lot of, it really helps us to understand it. I think I hope anyone watching will find this very helpful indeed. I'm trying to make sure that as many people who have questions have a chance to put them, and we don't sort of gather too many around individual question areas. So I'm going to ask Councillor Garrett. I think you're next on the list with your hand up. You're on mute, Councillor Garrett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I muted myself again by mistake. Thanks to everybody for the presentation today, and for it's really put kind of flesh to the report, because when we read it before there were quite a few gaps. For example, I noticed that parent was only featured once in the report under parenting, and we've heard from the heads about how parents are involved in the process, and so that's pretty important that we get that kind of understanding from the report, not just from the report, from the teachers involved, that there is engagement with parents. And I just wondered whether there would why we didn't have a breakdown of the reasons for exclusions. We just got kind of the raw figure for the numbers, but not any. I don't know if there's a reason for that, or whether that might be something that could be considered in future reports, so we can understand better what kind of issues teachers and head teachers are facing. And we heard about the different types of tariffs, and I think, as Hugo said, the risk of a teacher then freezing when they don't know whether they can exclude or not because they're worried about the figures, that can't happen. If there's a safety issue with children and teachers at risk from a child's behaviour, then decisions have to be taken without any constraints. So really, it was really about the role of parents. We've heard more about that, and I think I'd like to know a bit more about what happens on a typical day when a child is excluded on that basis. What would you expect to happen? We've heard about all the different support networks that there are, and different agencies that can be involved. So, most of as the counsellors here, probably exclusion to us means a child's not at school. Then what are they doing? Are they wandering the street? Is there a parent at home with them? I know it seems like there's a lot more support networks available now. So what would a typical exclusion period be like for that child in terms of what you would expect to do? I know I like the idea of the internal exclusion. At least it means the child is in school and there is a supervised nature. But if the child is excluded for serious tariff offence, then if they're at home, what kind of safeguards would you have in place to make sure the child isn't at home alone, or in the company of juveniles that might not be a good influence on them? And really, just going back to the report, for next year, maybe we could have a breakdown of the figures and the types of tariff offences, and a bit more about the parents in the report as well. How MCC and officers would expect schools to engage with parents. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Garrett. And Rowena, yes, did you want to pick up?
Yeah, thank you for your questions, Councillor Garrett, and your observations. Actually, I'm slightly horrified myself that we only mentioned parents once, so we'll definitely be looking at that for next time, and apologies for that. Absolutely, it is, they are central to all of this, and every exclusion would, we're person-centred as an authority and as an inclusion service, so the child and the parents' view would be absolutely held central to any decision. And sorry that wasn't as explicit as it should have been in the report. Equally, we're happy to report the reasons for exclusions. I think we allude to them in kind of a sentence or two. Just can't find that either looking through, but I think we do the analysis of the data that we get from the schools. We've got a data officer who goes through that in absolute granularity, and probably we could overwhelm you all with the data that we bring and the data that we share. But yeah, absolutely, we could definitely bring a bit more detail next time around the reasons for the exclusions. So yes, thank you for those. I think in terms of the when at home, I'm happy to start that, but again, I will hand over to schools. I think, an unintended consequence of an exclusion, is that the child is then at home, and it are the parents' responsibility for that period of time. And obviously for children who perhaps are having repeated exclusions, or for younger children, that can be really challenging. That can't be avoided. I think if we're at the point where an exclusion has been given, that just unfortunately is a consequence of that. I think in terms of as the children get older and the expectations, I know Hugo and Kelly have already alluded to that work would be sent home, but I don't know if you've got any more to add, because it's very difficult to as local authority, we would keep in touch with some of those families, because we'd be looking towards either planning for the reintegration or putting together the package of support. So there'd be a lot of communication sort of from, the vulnerable learner lead in particular, but officers who might be supporting the family. But I guess it's similar from a school point of view. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Hugo or Kelly.
Just to add a bit more, just from a school's perspective on that. Actually, if I can just I wanted to refer to the letter bit as well. Specifically, it kind of relates to it. Those students do have work that's set, but it is not the same, or trying to be the same as being in front of a teacher, of course. and there's plenty of the learning that goes on that they will miss that you cannot replicate, because it's about that interplay between the expert in the room and the students, or it's something practical, and that is a challenge that effectively can't be overcome by replicating that learning at another point. And that's one of the many reasons why exclusion is such a significant decision to make. What they do when they're excluded and what happens on the day, well, this is where it relates to the letter, we make sure that we have a conversation with every parent or carer to talk through. That's the first way that they will find out the exclusions happened. So that letter is awful. We put an additional paragraph with details in just to make sure it's there of what's happened. But it's crucial to have that conversation first, because again, it's voice rather than reading it. And we find that at least helps parents and carers understand and digest the information we're giving them in a way that a letter can't do. So whilst it can't entirely mitigate the situation, it does ameliorate it in terms of it them having a better understanding from the person who made the decision, or the people who were around the decision. It's also true that there are concerns around, well, if that student isn't at school, they're at home, are they on their own? And yes, the parents, of course, are the ones who are legally responsible, but we as schools would not exclude if we had safeguarding concerns around that student being at home. And I have in the past, and I'm sure Kelly has too, made different decisions for a student because we do not want that student to be alone at home, or because we know that student will go out and find people we do not want them to be with, and so we make other arrangements. And that's where that adaptability comes in. That's where internal exclusion or alternative provision or other agencies coming in is really, really important, because we've got that legal duty of care to protect, and we can't send them into an unsafe situation, of course. So there are complexities to that aspect as well.
That's a great point as well. You know, there are so many different aspects to this, and it comes back to one of your earlier comments. I think both Hugo and Kelly have made every case is different, and trying to get the right balance with them all is challenging. And so the typical excluded day question from Councillor Garrett, I guess part of the answer is that we won't always know what that young person will be doing during the day, and it can't be an assumption that they will be home for all of them. Very challenging. I'm going to keep moving on with the questions because we've got a number of hands up. And turning to Claire Wennett, who's our co-opted member. Claire, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, a huge thank you to Hugo and Kelly for their excellent presentations and just answering so well and giving a real picture of what it looks like in schools, which I really appreciate. My question is really for Morwenna and Rachel, and it may be one that would be, more easily answered by Will as well, and it's around budget. And the impact of budget. I don't know how Monmouth looks regarding their budget and their budget for schools, but I think we're all aware of the picture across Wales and across the province. We see schools having cut budgets, and that's the way it is, and it doesn't look as if it's going to be getting better anytime soon. And certainly that's the picture for other LAs that I work with. So when I see these cuts, and then we see it reflected, I think, in some of the numbers you've given us. And I'm kind of looking particularly at primary, because that's my sort of area of expertise. I see them rising, and that's due, isn't it, really to the trauma that we see children coming into school with, and the increased, as Rachel said, behavioural difficulties and complex needs. So it's almost like a perfect storm, in my view, that, you have these greater needs, and suddenly we're having schools who in certain circumstances may have to lose staff. And very often these will be support staff. So I think as an LA, you're working so wonderfully with your schools and so collaboratively. And I love the sound of the Inclusion Network and all the professional training. But on the ground in the schools, are you, and you may not be able to answer this fully, are you seeing an impact on any schools who have had to lose staff from their classrooms? I'm thinking of exclusions as being a result of where a teacher has 30 children, they're managing the 30 children, but they don't have that learning support staff member in their class full time anymore, who perhaps is just there for some time and shared with somewhere else, you making best use of that support staff. But then we have a dysregulated child who just cannot stay, no matter what happens, they can't stay without that support, and then they're excluded. So it's just an example, but do you see an impact? Are you able to answer that at all? Or is it something that as a local authority you are aware of? Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And I don't know who wants to pick that one up. Relationship with budgets. Good luck with that.
Yeah. Thanks. No, not at all. And, you know, I think there was sort of maybe a few silent nods around the table here. We can't get away from what you've described as the kind of budget position for the local authorities and schools across Wales is challenging. And I think that's fair to say that's the case in Monmouthshire as well. And also, you know, your word, the perfect storm, I think we are seeing this increase in demand on services and teams and a different presentation in our young people from a younger age as well, which is really interesting for us. So I think, I do think there is a challenge there. I think it's a really complex picture. But I think there is, you know, and I'm pretty sure it's in the report that a reduction in support staff who are available in our schools is likely to have a impact on the way that we can manage some of the behaviours that some of our children and young people are presenting with. And it's not just managing children in crisis, which is obviously part of it, but it's having what we call an emotionally available adult, available to kind of build those relationships and to have a relationship with the child, but also the family, and to maintain that over time. You know, for some children, we talk about, and this is where the work that we do at that preventative level is really important in Monmouthshire, and the buy-in from all of our schools. You know, we talk about provision at different levels, so that preventative, universal kind of, you know, and targeted support. Because for some children who maybe are having a really tough time at home, have got some experiences or some complex needs, you know, things like a daily check-in from a tuned adult who they know, who they've got a relationship, can make the world of difference for them. And that is, I think, in some schools and some circumstances, challenging for schools. What I can say, equally, from a Monmouthshire perspective and from my perspective, is our schools are amazing. We are surrounded by a fantastic group of schools and staff who work with kids who are really trying to do their best. And they're pretty flexible where they can be. And you know, we find that, you know, staff are being moved around and being used in kind of ever more creative ways. And I think that's probably where our focus on professional learning comes in, so that we not just provide training and then walk away, but we provide ongoing kind of themes around training, so people can engage with it at different times. We provide little sort of clinics and networks in some of our schools, so staff can access us directly. And that's all about building sort of confidence and competence in staff themselves, that they can deal with, you know, situations they're presented with. But yeah, I don't think we can come away from the fact that there is a budget impact across Wales, and that must be having an impact. You know, I haven't got a direct correlation. I'd probably stop talking before I dig myself in a hole. But would anybody else like to add anything along that?
I think the silent nods are turning into, you know, audible nods. But I suppose there might be the other aspect of this, which is it's not all about money. That, you know, that some of this is about culture, and a lot of the answers and points that have been made here talk about societal change, which is, it takes it to a different place, really. Excuse me.
Another sort of example, really, of how we work in Monmouthshire is, you know, we have an agreement, and actually the agreement has only kind of kicked in since September this year, 2025, but that the local authority have redirected some money into secondary schools for provision to support these learners in particular, children at risk of exclusion, children who are not attending regularly. And that was in discussion with the secondary head teachers, that, you know, it was felt that they know their schools and their children the best, and actually for us to provide that money directly to the schools so that they can shape their own alternative provision and their responses to children at risk of exclusion. So that's what we've established, this inclusion network that's already been mentioned across the 4 secondary schools with local authority officers. And that is really about us, I guess, sharing ideas, good practice, monitoring those provisions across. And, you know, again, that's not new money. It was money, you know, it's not a new money, it's not additional, but it's just using money in a different way in the hope that we can use it as effectively and as efficiently as possible. So yeah, just wanted to add.
Thanks for that, Marina. Moving on, thank you, Claire. Moving on to Councillor Strong. I think you've got your hand up next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just ask one question, but if you'll permit me, I'll just start with a bit of a comment based on my own 40 years teaching in one of our Monmouthshire comprehensive schools. That's very much to agree with the point that Hugo made, that lower numbers isn't necessarily good and higher numbers is not necessarily bad. I'm aware of one of your predecessors who, when he started head teacher in one of our schools, we used to call it suspended, excluded on fixed term exclusions a significant number of pupils in their first week. Yeah, that met with some raised eyebrows and a degree of disapproval. We're going back before I was a councillor here, but it was absolutely the right thing to do in terms of putting the school back on track, and probably even in terms of helping those pupils who were excluded on that occasion. Yeah, and I mean, many of those years I was a union rep, and I'm very much aware that often heads are under pressure from teaching staff to exclude pupils for the simple reason that those teachers want to get on with their job of actually teaching and not have the education of other pupils ruined by poor behaviour from what is always a small minority. So I would support those points. The question I wanted to ask was about the impact of curriculum. If the curriculum isn't right for a pupil, that pupil is more likely to disengage, to behave badly, to get into trouble. When I started teaching, and we're going back to the late 70s, early 80s here, we had a scheme in our school, and I think the other Monmouthshire schools were the same, where certain year 11 pupils would spend 4 days a week in what we call tech, then doing vocational courses, plumbing, bricklaying, and so on. It was mainly, I think it might have been all boys, but certainly mainly boys. And then would come back on a Friday and do their maths and their English. And that seemed to be successful. It's particularly gratifying when you would see their names on the sides of vans as well-respected local tradesmen. Yeah. The boot was put into that by the national curriculum, which in my mind was far too rigid and didn't meet the needs of a significant number of pupils. Now, we've now moved beyond national curriculum. There's a new curriculum sort of still in process, really, of being introduced in Wales. And I'd like to ask, is that, do you think, I won't so much say making a difference, or will it make a difference? Do you think it's sufficiently flexible to meet the needs of pupils who are otherwise likely to disengage and therefore get into trouble? Or are we perhaps just imposing a new orthodoxy, a new rigidity upon schools? A bit political, maybe, I know, but it's a genuine question. Yeah.
I think the new curriculum gives us a real opportunity here to create something bespoke for the individual learner. We have different waves of qualifications coming in. We have something called VCSEs, which we can tailor to the needs of the children, whether it's gardening or whether it's, as you said, D&T and tech and engineering. But that will need investment. So going back to Alistair's question right at the beginning around investment, it's about working with us as a school now to find the right curriculum for the needs of the children and ensuring that we can deliver that curriculum effectively. So it's not just tailored to their ability, but it's tailored to their interests as well. So I think the new curriculum is a real good opportunity for schools, but it will take time to embed and it will need a lot of investment. I don't know whether Hugo would agree with this.
Well, I think Kelly knows my favourite subject is curriculum, so we could be here for hours. Okay, so Curriculum for Wales does offer greater flexibility. So there's both the risk and the reward that individual schools are designing their own curricula, which requires a curriculum expert in every single school. And curriculum is not well developed in terms of training teachers. They train them on lots of other things, but not on curriculum very well. But that said, it has given us, because we're large secondary schools, it gives us the opportunity to really develop a broad and balanced curriculum, not just in the qualifications that I'll get to, but at Key Stage 3. So we have, of course we're not allowed to call it Key Stage 3 anymore, it's years 7, 8 and 9. But we have 3 years before they start their qualification. So 3 years where they get a real richness to the diversity of curriculum that you're talking about. So the classically academic subjects, the practical subjects, the more creative subjects, the logical and the emotional subjects, if you want to go down that route of describing, they're all there. So then at GCSE, BTEC, VCSEs, we're able to offer a broad offer there too. So we offer classics, we offer additional maths, triple science. We also offer engineering, construction, textiles, performing arts. So there is a real variety to that, so that we're able to meet the needs of and the interests of those students better, so that actually we are able to have different pathways for different students. So I think implicit within your question is around, does the curriculum with a new orthodoxy impose something and therefore isolate or distance people from education and from schools? And I'd say, given the right decisions by that individual school, no, it's got an opportunity to really bring them back in. And we see a real shift in year 9 into year 10 with lots of students who are on the cusp, who maybe have had some exclusions, and they get to that point when they realise they can make some decisions about what they want to study. And when that penny drops, sometimes you might be in a post-exclusion meeting, in a reintegration meeting, and you say, actually, in a couple of months, you're going to be deciding what you want to study. And the change in them is, oh, actually, that sounds quite good. So I could, and they start talking about their options and their interests and what they want to go and do and what they might want to do at college. And that often is the hook to bring them back in. So it can be a really, really powerful way for schools to be able to ensure that they're being inclusive of diverse range of interests.
It's fascinating to hear. Absolutely. Councillor Strong, it's a quick one.
Just very briefly, thanks for that. I'm sure we would, as a committee, very much like to have Hugo and others come back in the not too distant future to talk particularly about the impact of curriculum, because it's quite a complex area that you can't do full justice to in your answer. I'm particularly interested to hear about gardening being taught. Both my brothers went to a secondary modern school where they were taught gardening, along with all sorts of very useful vocational subjects. I went to a grammar school. We were never going to need these things because we were going to be able to afford to employ people to do it for us. Turned out not to be that way. I hasten to add, but yeah, let's with chair, maybe for the forward work programme somewhere. Let's have a look at impact of curriculum on not just exclusions, but on the nature of our schools.
It's a great point. I think your point is also very relevant to broader age groups in education about whether or not academic routes are as appropriate as apprenticeships instead of higher education and even some of the further education courses. I think the part that is encouraging about that is it's a discussion that seems to genuinely getting traction now in the UK in circles where hopefully some decisions will be made. But yeah, very interesting indeed. Not the least because 700,000 graduates right now can't find work. So I think this is all beginning to sort of bubble to the surface. I'm going to move us on to Councillor Pavia, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Can I just echo the words of my colleagues by thanking Morwenna and her team for the report and obviously for Kelly and Hugo's insights during this debate. I understand Hugo's earlier point about not getting distracted by the numbers or the differences between schools. And of course, while our role is not about holding individual schools to account, we are here to ensure that the council administration is fulfilling its duties as an education authority, and that includes supporting both the schools and learners, but also in making sure that the schools themselves are meeting their responsibilities appropriately and sharing the right information and data with us, so we can understand the trends and challenges in our schools and ensure that taxpayers' resources are targeted in the right and most efficient way. And and that is essentially our role. And I think when you've got schools where there is significant variance in the use of fixed term exclusions, I think that does warrant questioning, and that could be, as Hugo said earlier on, issues around particular cohorts and schools' contexts that are under strain. But also, I think it also warrants some understanding of sort of thresholds, behaviour systems, inclusion capacities within those schools and how they differ materially, and whether or not the data coding is consistent. And just drilling down on that point, Chair, 5.10, I think, in the report about one school is using the coding term as other, as particularly they could be used particularly to mask or disguise themes that are not allowing us to ensure that there's a transparency about why those fixed term exclusions are being attributed. So the use of that sort of lack of inconsistency, or the lack of consistency for coding, it prevents us from identifying root causes, ensuring the targeted interventions are taking place, and also for us as well, for councillors, to ensure that there's evidence of improvement, that things are going well. So I'd be interested to hear both from Kelly and Hugo, and I'm obviously conscious of time, how they ensure the exclusion reasons are coded accurately in their schools. And I'm also interested in how often do governors scrutinise exclusions, repeat exclusions and lost days, and what actions have followed from that scrutiny. And I've got two questions probably for Morwenna, Chair. In the report, it states on a couple of occasions that local authority officer capacity is increasingly under pressure due to, I think there's a number of factors there: rising demand for a range of tasks like supporting managed moves, the development of risk assessments, monitoring pastoral support plans, attending pupil disciplinary committee meetings. And it seems that more and more of our schools are reaching out for additional LA officer support to what is, in a sense, to try and be as proactive as possible to try and prevent these issues from escalating and the thresholds for exclusion being reached. So I'm just trying to unpack this and what this means in terms for us as an authority, in terms of resource, and whether or not there's been any business case put forward for during this budget cycle for additional support for your department, Morwenna. And finally, just on managed moves, and I'm just thinking about not managed moves within local authorities, but managed moves from other local authorities. And I was interested in Hugo's comments earlier on, but because we're bordered by both Welsh local authorities and English local authorities. How do local authorities officers work with their peers and other authorities to monitor the progress of those moves over 3, 6, 12-month period, to ensure that there's obviously that learner is settling well and hopefully is progressing on a really good track to reintegrating into school life, but also that there's no disproportionate impact on the host in school, not just pupils, but staff and the wider school community. So do we actively monitor and work with the transferring authority in those managed moves? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. And I think it splits into questions that Kelly and Hugo, you might want to address the first, and Morwenna and colleagues the second.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pavier. In terms of coding, this is essential for us because going back to the letter and the communication home, it's really important that we're really clear and transparent in the reason for exclusion because that is added to the letter. And then in terms of scrutiny with governing bodies, we are accountable to our governing bodies to present on exclusions. So we have something discreet, and I know other schools have, called a wellbeing committee, where we report on attendance, exclusions, behaviour, trends. They'll look at the coding, they'll look at trends over time, they'll look at individual year groups, male, female, they'll look at the barriers because as a governing body they have a responsibility as well and a duty of care to children and to the staff, and to look at really what support is working. If there's a prevalent category, does that link to safeguarding? We've got link governors that also link in with our wellbeing team to look at adequate support, what provision is needed. But then all of this information is fed through to the full governing body. And we have something called a professional discussion with the local authority, which takes place termly. And again, we look at exclusions, behaviour, attendance. So there's that additional level of scrutiny in terms of information that we're providing to make sure that it's really accurate and precise. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. And could I, Morwenna, do you want to pick up on schools reaching out for LA support and the managed moves monitoring?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the response, Kelly. So thank you, Councillor Pavia, for your questions. Yeah, in terms of LA officer capacity, we're a small local authority. We do a lot. We all wear lots of hats. But yes, we have put a pressure into the current budget to increase the capacity. At this moment, we don't know the details of what we want that to look like because there's some movement within the service going on. But absolutely, I think given that Rachel is one person, and if you just do the basic maths around numbers of exclusions and the need for the local authority to respond to those both in a proactive way, but also in a responsive way when they happen, to support schools and families and to build those packages around young people, which then require a level of monitoring and support. We've got really robust systems in place around our kind of monitoring of all of these. So all our permanent exclusions or children who are at risk of permanent exclusion are now flagged up at our inclusion panel that happens every 3 weeks. Multi-agency panel, very often attended by head teachers and senior school staff. And I think that then picks up your other point around managed moves. So we would monitor progress around managed moves through our inclusion panel for children who've had that package. Often we will put a package of support around that. That could be a PSP and a risk assessment, but it could also be financial support for that initial period of the managed move. We've actually worked really closely with schools recently and had a task and finish group, which we were delighted to head teachers were part of, to refresh our managed move protocol as a local authority and to really look at that in terms of a process and how we can enhance that. I think your point about the border, and I might hand over to Rachel in a moment because she definitely deals with this more than I do directly. It is a challenge sometimes working across those borders, and what we find is some of our regional colleagues, particularly within the Welsh system, we're all working on the same kind of system and the same kind of process, so that is typically easier. But into some of our authorities into England, they have different legislation and processes around exclusions, for example, so that can be a little bit more problematic. I'll pass over to Rachel because she might have something to add there.
Yes, sometimes it can be a barrier, but I think that we are making progress there. I do ask to attend managed move meetings in those kind of circumstances as well. So we're very much kept in the loop as to what's going on for that young person. And they're through that process from the start of the managed move, through the review meetings, and then also at the end of that managed move process as well.
Thank you, Rachel.
So does that answer that question?
Yeah, very helpful. I'm also conscious of time and the amount of questions that we've been putting to all of you. I see in the chat that Councillor Buckler actually asked for, she was referring to the report you mentioned on the use of smartphones, Hugo, and I don't know if that's a report that is capable of being more widely shared. I think if it's possible, I think we'd be very keen to see it.
Yeah, it's a position paper that's available on our school website.
Oh, wonderful!
So, but I can get it sent to councillors. I'll send a link to Morwenna, perhaps. Yeah,
that's really helpful. Thank you. I think Councillor Buckler pointed out something that would be of interest to all of us. Thank you for that. I'm going to move us on to the next report. Councillor Buckler, I see your hand up. Was it on that point? Because I do want to move on.
Yeah, can I just make a very, very quick point? I think both Hugo and Kelly have made an extremely good point about connecting with England as we are a border county. And I'm very struck, Hugo, by your curriculum thoughts on the risk and reward of the new curriculum. And I think we would definitely want to know much more about that sort of county-wide. So yes, let's please, as Councillor Strong said, explore that. I found that fascinating. But I'm particularly interested as well in connecting with, Welsh pupils if they want to go to English universities. How are you managing that? So that's for future. But I just wanted to I feel it's quite an important thing that needs more exploration.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. And, we'll definitely look at some of these issues as follow-ups. This is an area that's never a one-off entirely. So it's just to say the end of that report and the questions. Thanks for all the questions, and many thanks indeed for the answers. It's been so helpful to have the direct insight of two very experienced heads, and we're very pleased that you were able to join us today, and we wish you every success with your schools as you go back to deal with all the issues that you do. We thank you for it all, and I hope you pass on to your colleagues that on a day-to-day basis, we genuinely are extremely grateful for all the very hard work that is done in our schools, and be grateful if you could pass our thanks on to your colleagues just on that. The reason why we're having this discussion is because we see it as incredibly important for us as a county and also for the schools. We're going to move on to the next item, which is on School Health Research Network. You are extremely welcome to stay, but if you have other things that pull you away, then I hope it's not a school permanent exclusion or a fixed term exclusion that would do so, but if you're leaving, then thanks again. See you again soon.
2-minute break, Chair?
2-minute break is good. Let's make it a 3-minute break and be extensive. So we're just taking a short break online. We'll pick up again at 4:05. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Hugo. start. Okay, hello everybody, to restart the meeting again. And I'm going to introduce Emma Taylor, our Healthy Settings Lead, which is a fantastic title, to introduce us. I think you have a short presentation on the School Health Research Network, Student Health and Wellbeing. I think from the pre-meeting that we had, we anticipate there'll be quite a lot of links with some of the discussion, if not the report itself, that we've just been considering. So Emma, over to you.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. Hello everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this meeting today to provide you some information on the School Health Research Network, and in particular the Pupil Health and Wellbeing Survey. So I thought I would maybe give you a little bit of an oversight on the survey in addition to the report, and then talk a little bit in detail about how we use the data. So the SHRN network, so the School Health Research Network, is a partnership, and this is between Welsh Government, Public Health Wales and Cardiff University. And it aims to work with schools and a range of partners to improve the children's health and wellbeing through the use of good quality evidence for health improvement. So we can see here, I've just noted some of the participation rates in Monmouthshire schools, and we've had consistently good rates in our secondary schools since the surveys were extended out to all secondaries in 2017. And then nearly half of our primary schools participated in a phased pilot, which took place between 2021 and 2023. And then this work was expanded, and an invitation for all primary schools across Wales went out in 2024. And in Monmouthshire, 28 of our primary schools participated. So we were really pleased about that really high level of participation rates along with our schools. To note, the primary survey is aimed at what we call our year 3, 4, 5 and 6, so our Key Stage 2 or junior children. It's not currently available for pupil referral units, but they are carrying out a pilot. We're really pleased that our pupil referral service are participating in that pilot, so I think it just shows how much our schools value using the survey and the data that it provides. So the surveys themselves, they're administered by the teachers in the classroom setting. All the data is collected electronically from consenting learners. The surveys are available in English and in Welsh, and learners can opt out of answering any of the questions once they're participating in the survey. So they would just click, I do not wish to answer. And ethical approval for the study is obtained through Cardiff University's School of Social Sciences Research Ethics Committee. And further information regarding the survey methods, so it's all available on the SHRN website, so that's easy for you to access, as well as national data reports. And the secondary school survey is available to students right up until year 13, so our schools all opt in and give our sixth form students the opportunity to participate as well. So I've given you some screenshots here of what the reports look like. So our primary schools and secondary schools all receive an individual report. So you can see here on the left-hand side the range of the health behaviour, the topics that are included in the survey. So the surveys have really grown over the years, and we're seeing more and more health themes being included. So there's quite a lot of data in the reports that the schools receive. And then they're presented in the form of these bar graphs. So in the primary school, they'll get their year 3, 4, 5 and 6 data, then they'll get a school average, and then they'll also get a comparison to the Wales average. Now, some of the questions in the survey, they come from the World Health Organisation's Health Behaviour in School-Aged Children survey, and some of the language is adapted just for younger learners, but then that also provides us with some topic areas where there's consistency, where we can compare between the primary and the secondary surveys as well. So they get their survey results. Usually it's about a term after they've completed the survey, and the same for the secondary schools as well. But all of the surveys are anonymised. And if, for example, in a year group, less than 15 learners have taken part, then schools won't get the results for that year group, so as to make sure that no one can be identified. What the reports also include in each of the health topic areas is some insights into the evidence base around those health behaviours. And then that will include like suggestions that schools can consider in order to move forward and make some changes within their school environment. So that's what the reports will look like in primary. In secondary schools, very similar, although they include male and female in the year group bar charts that you can see there. And then they have an average for the school, and then they also have the national averages, male and female, are the lines across the top. So we've got the pink and the orange lines, which show where the data compares to the national averages. And it includes very similar health topic areas, but relevant to the age of the students that are answering the questions. So that's the individual reports that the schools receive. Now there's also local authority data, and all of our local authority secondary data is available through Public Health Wales on the Sharing Data dashboard. And this is publicly available, so if anybody wanted to access the data for themselves, simply put Sharing Data dashboard in your search engine and it'll take you to the website. So I thought I would just show you what that looks like. So we can see here that the dashboard includes the findings from all of the surveys since 2017 to 2023. So they take place every 2 years. And it only shows the results for 11 to 16-year-olds. So it doesn't show the year 12 and 13 results on a local authority or national level. So when you go onto the website, you can click on the health topic area that you're interested in. So I've selected physical activity and diet. You can see the range of other health topic areas there as well. And then I've selected physical activity. Then when you go onto the left-hand side of the website, you can choose which set of data you'd like to look at. So I've chosen 2023 data. I could compare the last 2 years if I wanted to, or I could look at a trend over a number of years. And then I've selected local authorities. So then it brings up all 22 local authorities in Wales. So you can pick whichever local authority in Wales you'd like to look at. So I've just selected our neighbours within the Gwent region. And the question is the number of students reported at least 60 minutes of physical activity every day for the last 7 days for 11 to 16-year-olds. So you can see here that students in Monmouthshire in 2023 have reported higher levels of physical activity than our neighbouring authorities, as well as the national average, which is the orange line down on the right-hand side of the graph. So that's just one example of one data set on the dashboard. There's lots of data in the dashboard, so for all of the previous surveys that have taken place. So I've just pulled up another example here. So this question is around being satisfied with their lives, so as part of the 2023 survey. So the question was a picture of a ladder, and at the top of the ladder there was the number 10, meaning best possible life, and the bottom of the ladder was 0, is the worst possible life for you. So in general, so students were asked where they would place themselves on the ladder. And so we can see the answers here. So if they answered 6, 7, 8, 9 or 10 to the question, then they would feel that on the scale of best possible life, then they've reported that they have satisfaction in their life. So we can see here that actually Monmouthshire is slightly above the national average for that in that year, for that cohort of children, and for similar to Blaenau Gwent. So I just thought I'd share an example of how the dashboard can be used. And then I thought I'd just expand a little bit more on how we use the data with our schools. This is included in the report. If we think about, we support our schools to analyse their reports when they receive them, thinking about at the time pupils participated, what was the context, what were the cohorts in those year groups, what things were going on at that point in time for those children. Get them really to think about what their current practice is in school and what provision they have in place to help inform their action plans. So some examples might include, they might want to focus on some whole school activity, maybe around healthy hydration. So they might want to include increase the number of children that are drinking water, reduce the number of children that are drinking sugary drinks. So that might include input in the curriculum. That might include whole school action. They might get a pupil leadership group to lead something, to do some assemblies or to do some projects. There might be some really good practice in one classroom where they've got really good levels of children drinking water, and in another classroom it might be a lot lower. So it's an opportunity when they come together as a staff to look at their data to find out, well, why is it so high in your class and much lower in my class? What are we doing differently and how can we learn from each other? So that's what we do on a school level basis. And then we also work really closely as a cluster. So we've got 4 clusters based around our secondary schools where we come together with the wellbeing leads for all of those schools and we meet termly. When they get their reports, they bring with them what's going really well, because it's really important to celebrate things that are working well where they've got a really effective practice. And then they'll also bring things that they need to prioritise and develop, and we can then look at that at a cluster level and see, are there any areas for collaboration where we can work together, and we've got a case study example on the Shern website of where we've done that, and there's an example in the report based around physical activity. And then from a local authority perspective, we have our Wellbeing in Schools Partnership Group. We've got a really good selection of stakeholders on that group, including school representatives, different local authority officers across different directorates as well, which is really positive, and as well as partners in health and our local authority school improvement service. And so we use the Shern data, but also alongside other types of data to identify what we feel we could work on collaboratively at a local authority level. And so at the moment, we are looking at sleep. So this is some data from our very recent primary school report. So we can see here that our children, so in primary schools, our children are in the green bar, and then the national average is in the dark blue bar. So we can see we're slightly above the percentage for children reporting problems sleeping. And then our year 5 and 6 children, again, were slightly above the national average for children having difficulty getting to sleep. So the group have decided that's an area that they would like to focus on. So we're establishing a task and finish group to see how we can work collaboratively to try and improve those health behaviours there. And then I did include in the report as well some challenges. And really, there's the logistical challenge of secondary, and we have got large secondary schools, haven't we? All those students participating in the survey, it takes at least a lesson to complete, and they have to have access to IT equipment to be able to do that. Information goes out beforehand to parents and carers so that they're informed of the survey, and the anonymisation so that there's that consent process, and children can opt out on the day as well. So that's the timetabling for the schools. So we're really appreciative of the secondary schools that they do put that commitment in to making sure that all their students can access and participate in the survey. But then the delay in receiving the data and the reports, there has been recently quite a significant delay for schools and for the local authority, and that I think just makes it a little bit more challenging for us to use the up-to-date data quickly enough to maybe implement some changes. So I'm going to finish my report there, my presentation, and then see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Emma, and that's a really helpful steer through the data, and I'm sure that's data we'll want to familiarise ourselves with, and it will be updated, I'm sure, as we go through the years. I noted when I was looking at the information contained in it that individual year numbers may be not very helpful but the comparisons between previous years is very helpful, and I do wonder whether or not we can get more than just 2 years in some of it, because some of trajectory might be more useful to see over a longer period of time than just 2 years. You can get blips, whereas trending might be more informative. But yeah, just to see if there are any questions, if we could remove that screen, we can see. And I see Councillor Bond with your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Shall I wait for Emma to move the... Thank you. Thank you very much. So I can see now that we haven't got all the other Moena or any other... Oh, have we got Moena? I've seen you now. Thank you. I can see you there. Brilliant. Or any of the heads. Because the question I wanted to ask in the last section was really related to this as well, because what you brought up. So I'll ask my most important one first in case I lose my last one like last time. So most important things that you were saying was multi-agency. I wonder how much counselling's involved. Do they get psychoeducation, and do they get any sort of so I think I mentioned, but it wasn't completely answered, about the reactive work that you have to do, because maybe you haven't got the resource to do it, but giving those young people the psychoeducation to understand the changes they're going through and help them soothe themselves before they come on the path for you to identify, and then help them out with your trauma-informed training and everything. So so that's the first one, really. But that links also into, if you look at the secondary school example on flip page 3 of 7, that was very much about resilience, positive psychology, emotional regulation, stress management, all the things which are social emotional learning, or you call it social emotional mental health, that would help just everybody in school, in both schools, help to cope with their emotions and start to regulate their emotions. So I wonder how much of that sort of information is then being taken back, and has any of that been implemented, please? That's the first thing. So the first one was around the multi-agency, and is it counselling? Do you get to the root cause? Because when you were talking before about trauma-informed staff and whatever, but the trauma or the ACEs or the whatever could be external to school, could be in the home environment, could be, as you suggested, about safeguarding and everything else. So how far do you get to the root cause to help that young person or child or young person then take another path? That's the first one. And the second one was about implementing, for example, that brilliant example on page 3, which says about the resilience and all the psychoeducation. And the third question is, please, why were only 27 out of 30 on the presentation, Emma? I think you said 28, but in the report it says 27 of the 30 primary schools surveyed. And why was one not eligible, please? And why were we not including pupil referral units? Because I would say that you might have some significantly interesting and informative data from those people. Thank you. I just saw you smiling at each other. Thank you.
So who wants to start with those? Go on, Emma.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. I'll start with the easier questions first. So that my error, it is 28 primary schools. So the presentation was correct and the report was incorrect. And of the schools that didn't participate, the primary, one was not eligible because the questions are only suitable for Key Stage 2. And one of our schools only has foundation phase learners in it. One school chose not to participate because they had a large number of families that didn't consent, and so it didn't make it viable. We wouldn't have had enough data for them to produce a report, and then another school chose not to participate. So they had all originally registered to participate, but just hadn't actually got to the stage where they completed the survey. But I think we were really pleased that we had 28. With regard to, I'm working backwards on your questions, sorry. So with regard to implementation of the curriculum, so you've got the example in the report from the secondary school. So this is as a result of, the surveys take place every 2 years. So this is a result of the 2023 survey. And I do know that these changes have been implemented in this school in the curriculum, and they've done a lot of work around planning their health and wellbeing curriculum, and also signposting and getting support from external partners to come in and talk to classes and support the delivery of the curriculum on a whole school level. So I do know that has taken place in that example there. And then go back to your first question around counselling. We do have a school-based counselling service, but I wouldn't be able to answer those questions specifically around the work of that service. I don't know if you can pick up anything there, Moena.
Yeah, a little bit. So our school-based counselling service actually sits within the Social Care Directorate rather than within the Education Directorate, or Children, Learning Skills and Economy, as we are now. We do have close links with the school-based counselling team in various ways, and there is school-based counselling available in all of our secondary schools. I couldn't tell you exactly the proportion of time, but I believe that's every week. There is a school-based counsellor in every secondary school, and then primary school referrals into the play therapy service are kind of on a needs-led basis, is my understanding on that. But if you would like some more information around the specifics of how that team work, we'd be happy to bring that back. The lead for that team does sit on our Wellbeing in Schools subgroup, which I chair, and Emma, myself and Emma sort of lead on that. And the member of staff who leads on the school-based counselling service attends that meeting, so is party to all of this data and information. But I know that they collect their own kind of data and information in terms of the nature of the needs for which children are either self-referring or getting referred for school-based counselling. But that doesn't actually sit within our umbrella.
We'll make sure, Robert will make sure that we follow up with your colleagues in social care and see if we can get a response on that. But thanks for the question, Councillor Bond, on that. Yeah.
Can I come back, please? So that school that implemented that in the curriculum is wonderful to know, because I know it's not all schools, and wondered how best practice is shared, because I know it's not a local school to me. My question about counselling was really about in the exclusion scenario, when you were saying that you've got the multi-agency and how much that's used. And the other question was about the pupil referral units, Emma, that I think fell off, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Bond. Yeah, the pupil referral units currently are not eligible to participate in the survey, but Decipher, which is the research element of Cardiff University, are running a pilot, and our pupil referral service are participating in that pilot. So they're testing the questions at the moment to see how suitable they are for those learners.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. And
the other...
Shall I pick up the best practice? So I think Emma mentioned the Local Authority Wellbeing in Schools Forum. I guess at a local authority level, that is very much where we identify action plan as a collective group, including our schools, but then would also share examples of good practice through that forum. But as Emma said, there's also wellbeing lead cluster basis group, so there would be sharing within the cluster between secondary and primary phase education. In terms of, I don't think I fully understand your question about the multi-agency bit and the use of counselling, but obviously being kind of thinking about a child who might have received an exclusion, that, you know, the support that might go in around that child could involve school-based counselling would be, you know, one option that would be there, but also the involvement of education support team or the educational psychology service would be very commonplace in those kind of instances, dependent on the need and dependent on the circumstances. But that very much would be something that we would promote through the multi-agency forum around the child and the family, as to whether or not there was a specific intervention that the child required in order to kind of process, deal with, learn better ways of coping, so that hopefully those behaviours that perhaps presented the challenge in the first place aren't repeated. But obviously that would always be on a very individualised basis, depending on the incident and the child involved and their family. Does that answer your question, Councillor Bond?
Yes, thank you very much. It was missing from before, so thank you for that.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bond, and that's actually very helpful in the answer as well. Moving on to Councillor Strong.
Thanks, Chair. It's a very interesting survey, but of course it's only any value because of any action that it leads to, and therefore that page about secondary school examples that Councillor Bond referred to is especially interesting. I do wonder, though, whether our teaching staff have the degree of training that they would need to be able to teach some of this well. We're dealing with mental health. Some of it is clearly very good stuff, and that most people could manage to teach. But some of it dealing with issues of mental health, which is a very complex thing. Resilience, for example. Again, going back to my earlier career, I can imagine a stereotypical male PE teacher going into a class and saying all you kids need to do is man up, and that's resilience. Clearly, we are not talking in those terms, but are our staff well enough trained to deal with a very delicate subject like resilience, or even without doing harm? Yeah, that's just one example of general issues when you're teaching issues that relate to mental health. There's a reference there to wellbeing journals. Just by coincidence, I came across an article, I think it was only yesterday, by a psychologist who was expressing concern about these sort of things where a whole class was asked to do wellbeing journals, which seems to be what's happening here. But they tended to lead to a focus on negativity, to, is pathologizing a word? I think it is, isn't it? Pathologizing what you might call the normal stresses and strains of everyday life, and making more of them than are actually there. I don't really see in any of this any sense of caution in these sort of approaches, and I'm sure that it follows on from my first point. But caution is a really important thing when you're dealing with mental health. It's far too easy to blunder into what looks like a good idea, but isn't necessarily so.
Yeah, some strong points there. I don't know if there are any comments against that. It's less of a question more than some comments, I think, Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. I think, you're right to bring those comments forward. What we do see developing in particular in our secondary schools with the new curriculum for Wales is departments that are specifically teaching this area of the curriculum. So we're having a group of staff who are having extra professional learning in order to build up those skills and to be confident enough to be able to teach in these topic areas, rather than it being a lesson that any member of staff would teach. So we're seeing that as more common practice in our secondary schools. So we've got specialist departments that are teaching that. We do have a wide range of professional learning then to support them around that. And there are some really good resources available around mental health and resilience that are really well written, that we would signpost schools to be able to deliver that as well. And particularly when we look at the example in the report from this secondary school, whenever a school introduces a new process or a new system, it will be monitored as part of their monitoring, evaluation and review cycle as well. So we would expect them to monitor how that's going, and if it is having a positive impact, great. But if it isn't, we would expect that they wouldn't continue then. Is that?
Thanks, Emma. And Councillor Strong, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, yeah. So you're saying it's not like it used to be, where it would be, the maths teacher teaching an SE lesson because they got one slot on their timetable. It's much more specialist teachers. If that's the case, that's something I would very much welcome. But I do note that, for example, the wellbeing journals were part of tutor time when it would be a non-specialist teacher. So a lot would depend upon the quality of the monitoring. We always have to ask, is this working? Yeah, and so, monitoring is crucial.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move us on to Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Strong sort of raises some interesting thoughts, and I don't know, I think I'm struggling, but I'm trying to work out whether, you know, this process, this sort of, the reporting that we're looking at here is about the process, or whether the outcome is the most important thing. And I'm the pupils that I particularly think would need more input than any others on social, emotional, and mental health are the excluded pupils, the pupil referral unit learners. And when you say that they are going to be included now, but what sort of structure is there? It makes it sound as though the structure isn't there helping them now. So I feel that that's unclear. I'd be quite interested to know what you say about that. And actually on a point that you flagged up about sleep, that children are having difficulty in sleeping. An old-fashioned approach might say, well, they're not getting enough physical exercise, because if you've had lots of physical exercise, you sleep well, don't you? So, is that something you're exploring? What are we trying to achieve out of this? So thank you. I know it's a bit broad, but I feel some of it's a bit process-based rather than trying to sort things out.
So it's a well-made point, I think, Councillor Buckler. What is the sort of question that sits behind information and data. So I guess it's a perfectly reasonable point to be asking. So Emma, we've got this data. So what? What is the outcome of having all this information?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Buckler. I think we need to reflect that this is only one data source that is used, and particularly in a school, they've got lots of different data sources, and this is anonymised. So this kind of gives us a picture of what the approach and the ethos and the provision generally is like within a school, with maybe some trends in certain classes or year groups. But they'll have other data sources where they'll be monitoring and tracking individual pupils, and they'll have that information that they hold in school. Just thinking on some of the broad things that we've done in the past. So for some previous surveys, probably 2 surveys ago, lots of our children reported that they didn't know how to access wellbeing in their school or in their community. And so we worked really hard with the partnership group and the schools. And Hugo mentioned it earlier, they've really, really improved how they signpost. So how they signpost the support that's in school, but also how do they signpost support that's available within the community. So they've done that in a range of ways, whether that's posters in the school, on their school websites, for example, and actually holding events where they've brought in external partners into the school to say, we're here, we can support you and your family. So I think a lot of work has happened with our schools since that was identified as a priority a couple of years ago. So I suppose that's just one example of how we're using the data in a more broader sense. And I think maybe we want to pick up the PRS question.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor Buckler. And yeah, as Emma said, this is just one source of data, and obviously it's a national research network. So the idea is that we can have that comparable position, I guess, is of use. But just to kind of reaffirm some of what Emma said and also respond a little bit to Councillor Strong earlier. So health and well-being is one of the new curriculum areas of learning experience throughout the new curriculum. So every school, there is an expectation that there is a delivery of a health and well-being curriculum. Now, I'm not a curriculum specialist, and unfortunately we've lost our 2 head teachers, but that is a real area of professional development and skill building for staff in schools. And that would include our pupil referral service. So within the pupil referral service, they would be teaching to the health and wellbeing AOLE, so area of learning experience. But also, as Emma's alluded to, the notion of pupil voice is really strong throughout all of our schools. So schools individually would be collecting data, feedback, information from pupils in lots of different ways around specific issues or general kind of, there's surveys and all sorts going on in school. I think this Shern was a particular area that we were asked to come and kind of share how we use that data. And I think for us, it's that provision, that comparable bit. And I think it allows us as a local authority to pick out some of those themes and to look at that both at a kind of local authority level, but then on a cluster and down into the school. And I guess the uniqueness is it's anonymised and offers that kind of broad brush across many different sort of health areas. So I hope that sort of answers that a little bit.
I think one of the issues that sort of seems quite striking to me is that we need to be a bit cautious about using 1 or 2 years of information, because they can throw up, anomalies that aren't easily explained, and that makes us all, I think, a little bit cautious about extrapolating too much from it. For example, in the data sets for Monmouthshire, truancy and school pressure are in a slightly more worrying level than the average for Wales. That might have perfectly sensible explanations, but it would, I suppose, potentially an area for our team to be looking into to see if there is anything behind it. But I think it's building up the picture over time that can be helpful, as well as comparing across different authorities. Councillor Buckler, were you satisfied with those responses?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Morwenna. And that, yes, helpful. Thanks.
Thanks very much. So moving on finally to Councillor Garrett.
Thank you for the report. It's really fascinating. A bit like Councillor Strong, I'm a former secondary school teacher, and having covered a few PSE lessons in those days, it's now had the H added to it. I think this is a fantastic kind of data set that could be used across schools, with teachers understanding their cohort and the kind of issues that some children might face, and maybe building, like the secondary school example, building in positive processes during the school day, or you could use this in across the curriculum in PE, sports science. You could get students could be analysing this data because it's anonymised. This could become part of the curriculum. Effectively, looking at your particular school and what maybe what the pupil body could do to improve things in their school. You could get student ownership of this. And we talked about the example of sleep being an issue for some children. How can you kind of pupils empower themselves really to kind of improve their lives and perhaps make their health better. So I think this is fantastic. The one concern I had was just with the way pupils might respond, because there might be a tendency for some pupils to kind of want to give the most positive answer, maybe more the most honest one. So do you kind of build into this any kind of allowance for perhaps children kind of think of like, I've got to give the healthiest response possible rather than maybe giving the most honest answer? So I think this is fantastic. I hope schools will use it. I hope the schools that weren't involved, their parents will want to take part in it in the future, because it really does give a fantastic kind of database of information that teachers and parents and pupils themselves could use to try to improve their health and well-being. But just one point about, do you build in a kind of a assurance about the honesty of pupils? That's one of the things I'd be concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. And I'm sure Emma, you'll be pleased to hear Councillor Garrett's comments about that too. Yes, did you want to just address the question?
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. Unfortunately, I can't answer that question. That would be the research team would be able to answer that question. But I think anecdotally, we know there are always going to be some learners that give you the answer they think you want to hear, particularly when it's around well-being and it's quite subjective. So I think that's a fair comment that you've made there. And I noted your suggestion about around using the data in the curriculum. Lots of our schools do that. Actually, that's where we see some really effective practice. They're using types of different types of health data in maths, for example, or asking their student leadership groups to pick sections of the data and to look at those and how they can improve, take action in their individual schools. So we do have some really good examples of some really effective practice in our schools. I'm picking up on your comment earlier, Chair, around comparison of the trends. Our secondary schools, because they've been participating since 2017, have all of their data and they are tracking that and are able to look at the trends to see where things have improved and not improved. So they do have quite a good handle on their individual school data as well, to be able to do that. Is that okay?
Thank you, Emma. That's very helpful, and it's an interesting question. Thank you for that, Councillor Garrett. Okay, thanks very much for the questions and for the report and taking us through the data sets that are there. And I think it's for us to spend some time as we go through the year actually looking at it. So I appreciate your time taken to explain that to us and give us the links. Morwenna, thank you for your time this afternoon. It's been very helpful to have you here and providing responses. Thanks to the members who are online. Councillor Buckler, I hope the flooding, I hope the rain has stopped. And also Councillor Garrett, I hope you're both okay in terms of what I know you experienced very severe situation in November. So I hope it's much less so now. And we'll call the meeting to a halt. Our next meeting is February the 10th at 10 o'clock in the morning, returning to normal 10 o'clock start with a pre-meet at 9:30. So thanks in the meantime. I'll call this meeting to an end. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, some interesting